Hi and welcome to the Machine Ethics Podcast. This time we're talking to Harriet Pellereau. This episode was recorded on the 4th of October 2023. Harriet and I talk about AI's lack of reasoning ability, the company Mind Over Tech, uses of generative AI, and indeed, what is creativity? We briefly bring up a new idea, creative duty. We also talk about work-life balance and the global initiative 4-Day Week Global, the hidden costs of convenience, responsible technology, and much, much more. If you like this episode, you can find more episodes at machine-ethics.net. You can contact us at hello@machine-ethics.net. You can also follow us on Twitter, machine_ethics, Instagram, Machine Ethics Podcast, YouTube, youtube.com/@machine-ethics. And if you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/machine ethics. Thanks for listening and hope you enjoy. Cool. So, hi Harriet. Thanks for joining me in the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
If you could tell me who you are and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Harriet Pellereau and I am the co-founder of a digital habits behavior change company called Mind Over Tech. But I also wear many other hats. I have worn the hat of creative. I did a BA in model making and worked in advertising for a spell. And then that drew me into the world of programming. And I was a technologist for a spell. I was making stuff with code and building apps. And that led me to being a teacher where I was teaching people about code and about how cool it is. And then that led me to being a teaching director where I was teaching people how to teach people how cool code was. And in amidst that process, I also became a mother. I have an 8-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. But today, I'm just excited to be here. So thanks very much for having me.
You're welcome. It's very, very nice to have you. So the first question on this podcast, because we are predominantly, I would like to say an AI podcast, but it's mostly about the ethics of technology, I guess. It feels like it's getting broader and broader these days as these technologies both overlap with our other technologies, but also in our lives. But to kick us off, what is AI for you, Harriet?
What is AI? I think that the first thing that is sensible to do is to actually define intelligence, because, that's a kind of component of that. And, we could describe that as the ability to understand and learn and problem solve and adapt, but also to reason. Obviously, artificial intelligence is when those behaviors, those actions are being completed by something that's been created by man, like a computer. So I sort of been thinking a lot about, therefore, what fundamentally is different between the two. I do think a lot of the kind of questions that we have are around the fact that artificial intelligence is slightly limited in its ability to reason. Like human reasoning is informed by facts and logic. Although neuroscientists have actually proven that emotions are integral to decision making. I think there's some studies. I think there's a study from the 90s where there were sort of patients that had that sort of emotional region of their brain damaged. It was the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, those sort of areas which are kind of key to emotion. And in those states, the patients were rendered unable to make decisions. And so, I think that whilst, we can definitely attribute some modes of intelligence to artificial intelligence, ultimately, the kind of the lack of emotion, computers fundamentally lack emotion, and therefore they can't perform reason to the same extent that humans can. And And so I would say that artificial intelligence is slightly misleading as a term because it suggests an intention and a kind of an ability to reason that I don't think they can truly have in a comparative way to humans. That was a good example for you there, Ben.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, in truth, it's fascinating the different things that people come up with as a solution to that. Sometimes people are very short and know exactly what, and other times it's like, oh my God, I hate this question. I don't know. It's going to be a while. One of the things I think it was interesting with what you just said was that I guess it's always in comparison, right? So in comparison to us, this is the case. But maybe if we're thinking of these systems as an other thing, which has maybe, let's say, an intelligence which is other and not necessarily directly comparable, but lives that kind of style of thinking, that the thinking itself, let's say, is just different, then maybe it has its own thing of way of working, and maybe we just need to think of a better term for it, and a better category, because we humans like to categorize things and put them in buckets so we can talk about them. I mean, that's another way of thinking about it, that it's this other way of thinking that we've created artificially, which works in this other different way. And
yeah, I think that's really true. Maybe it's almost at times like an aspirational form of intelligence, because like we've just said, true reason is slightly out of humanity's grasp because it will always come laced and filtered by emotion. Computers are free from that. So there's a form of logic and decision making that can be made that's very different to ours. So yeah, I think maybe artificial intelligence is the right term, but a form of thinking, learning, reacting that is complementary to intelligence, perhaps.
Yeah, I like that idea. So for context, could you give me a short description, I guess, of what Mind Over Tech is and is doing and wants to do and is striving for and all those sorts of things?
Absolutely. Okay, so I described Mind Over Tech as a digital habits behavior change company. So we work with organizations to help their people use digital devices in a way that supports their well-being, productivity, and connection. Why do we do this? Because, as I said, I have a background as a technologist. So does my co-founder. We both love technology. We both think it's incredibly empowering and exciting, brilliant. But, I think it's, as well as being aware of what it can give us, we're quite aware of what it can take away. And so we focus on helping people take action in that situation, helping teams take practical steps to become more intentional in the way that they use their devices. And we provide physical toolkits, and we give talks, and we run workshops and training programs that help organizations build effective digital workplace cultures. And we work with big companies, tech and financial companies, and a range of companies who are going through a period of intense change. Like we partner with 4 Day Week Global. They're working with companies who are transitioning to a whole new way of working, a whole new work week. And so we can kind of fit into those specific moments of change as well.
But it's not like you're a consultant who's like recommending technology. You're helping to, I was trying to think of the way that you were describing it before, but you're enabling them to essentially reflect on what will work best for them going forward and the people within the company, organization, so that they can almost go forward and help themselves, essentially, right?
Exactly. Like it's not in our power to, it's not for us to say what are good ways of using technology and what are bad habits and what are good habits. It's our role to help people learn through experience what works for them, to help teams discover different ways of using technology in the workplace that actually could lead to high levels of productivity, increased well-being, increased connection between those teams. So we try and help people become, like I said, more intentional in the way they approach that. When I think often with technology, we're so excited about it. We let it in and we launch forth into it without fully considering the cost and the impact of it. So it's maybe, just encouraging that sense of intention and for people to learn for themselves what works for them.
Yeah. What is it? Like, I think a couple of years ago, it was just plainly apparent that having conversations with anyone who worked in an office was struggling to either switch off or to control the amount of emails they were getting, or to get away from the office, or like all these different dials which you can twist on, like you were saying, like the work-life balance and the wellness element, which then also impacts obviously the organization itself. If you have all these people who are always on and they're burning out because you have a boss who sends them 20 emails every day and they don't have a structure, then they might not understand actually that what they're doing might be hurting people, or that certain people might need certain other ways of working, or if you're working from home, all these different things. So I think in the digital work environment, it just feels like unless you're magic and you made all this work for you and it's all groovy, then it's probably worth like stepping back and having a reflection on your use or the organization's use of some of these technologies, which I just said a lot, sorry, but
no I agree. I think that it's easy to assume, and also it's easy to just slip into ways of working and habits that actually aren't serving the direction a team wants to go, or the kind of values of an organization. And moments to reflect upon that, I think, is super important. You also said something that around like different people having different needs. That's extremely important, and a reason why, again, we don't tell people what to do, but we try and help them discover it, because everyone has different needs. And I think actually becoming aware that everyone may have different needs to you as well. There's a huge impact in diversity. And when I was at school, I was told I had an assessment, and I was told I was dyslexic. And it's only been in turning 40, like being 40 now, that I've actually had a diagnosis for ADHD, which actually makes so much sense of my whole career and why I think technology is amazing. And I'm so delighted to solve problems. And, it's been an incredibly useful, I think, part of who I am, and discovering what's been driving me all these years. But it also explains why I do find self-regulation of my, tech and my devices extra difficult, because my brain is constantly jumping around and searching for novelty and all the rest. And so actually being aware of how our minds work and how to create boundaries and set ourselves up in an environment where, we're reducing the cognitive and constant distraction that's all around us. Like, how can we set our workspace up so that that's mitigated, and be aware of working colleagues and their neurodiversity, of what they need and how they actually perform best. And there's lots and lots of stuff. There's lots of ideas. I mentioned a physical toolkit. At Mind Over Tech, we have a set of cards, a box of cards called the Digital Habit Lab, that contains 56 different experiments and different sort of scientific evidence experiments that have been really well tested and that people can try out to disrupt their habits. And that allows people to actually take action, because I think it's all very well to talk about this and to say how hard it is. Behavior change is really difficult, and I think it's particularly difficult with technology. It's similar, I'd say, if you had a kind of eating disorder. You still need to eat, you still need to have food, and we can't really completely cut technology out of our lives, certainly not every minute. We need it, and it's extremely beneficial to us and is a huge part of modern life. So it's like trying to figure out how we can support ourselves to self-regulate in those instances.
Yeah. So a couple of months ago now, I subscribed to your newsletter because I love you guys and what you guys do. And there was a piece on the kind of impending changes to creativity, kind of the AI generative stuff, which was highlighted in that newsletter, and some of your thoughts about it, which drove me to get in contact with you, even though I would have loved to talk to you anyway, because we're kind of on, we're almost got a mini series on generative AI at the moment, as it's high in people's minds. They can see it, they can touch it themselves. So I wanted to talk to you about your feelings about the use of AI, and it's interesting for me what your opinions are, because one, you are a creative person and you want to make things with technology, but also you have spent a lot of time teaching people about technology. And it's funny because this technology almost changes that relationship as well. Like, again, so especially when you're talking about generating code or just generating artifacts. So I was wondering, it feels like a new an epoch, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it really just has been a question that's been bubbling in my mind for a while. And I'm also a huge fan of your podcast, and this, I feel like you were so early in this space to be discussing these questions, and thanks to you, I began thinking about it as well, and how it kind of would shift over time as new abilities, became, technology was able to do more and more. In terms of creativity, I posted about this recently. I wrote a kind of long form article about it, because generative AI, I think, has challenged a lot of people, and it's challenged a lot of assumptions and opinions we have about the way we work, and what creativity is. And then I think when any new technology becomes popularized, there is a natural, sort of polarizing of opinion. Some people are extremely excited about it. I've normally been on that side. There's always going to be fear. There's always going to be a sense of, what will this take away? What can we be replaced, etc. And I think I was sort of speaking to that, and actually looking at and reflecting on some of the things I'd seen that year. Like this year, it's been some really interesting stuff. So like in my article, I kind of talk about this photography competition, the Sony World photography competition that was in April, and an artist called Boris Eldegson won the this award, won the kind of creativity award with an image that was generated with AI. He didn't disclose it had been before he entered, and says that he did it to see if these competitions were, quote unquote, ready for AI. And he declared they are not ready, because, they obviously couldn't tell. And he was very strongly of the opinion that the AI generated images are not photography. One is creating an image with light, one is creating it with prompts. And I absolutely agree with him. I think what's interesting is where you kind of apply value, and what you think is it's still a beautiful image. It's still a really haunting image that he created, and clearly the judges thought that it was award winning. And then also this year in May, this game Jam, GMTK, prohibited the use of AI to generate assets or code in their annual game making marathon, which was, a really interesting move, because it's a coding and tech creative event, and you had people saying, like, why don't they just like ban Photoshop and make us, code our own engine? And so confused by the movement. It made me think, like, why is it different? What is different? And it poses a question: is it because AI is like a performance enhancing drug? It's so creative that it can't be put into a competition. And then in June, I went to the London Design Biennale at Somerset House, and went to a forum called AI Made in Our Image with John Mack, artist, who's very interested in this in this world of technology and humanity. And there was an artist there who created a robot that he called Ada, a humanoid artist robot. She was not just a robot, she was an artist, and she had an artist's smock on and a paintbrush. And they were discussing, the nature of creativity and AI. So Ada has like cameras in her eyes, and she looks at stuff and has kind of these algorithms that she draws and creates paintings and sculptures and all this kind of stuff. And artwork attributed to her has sold for millions of dollars. So it's an interesting kind of opportunity to discuss what is creativity and what is she an artist, etc. He actually said in this event, Ada is not capable of true creativity, which I think is true.
It feels like a bit of a caveat, though, doesn't it? Like, what is true creativity? Like,
I know, and you look at how the artworks are made. She's the stuff that she makes is 3D printed by a Swedish computer scientist. Things that she paints and are rendered and painted by a real female, actual woman painter, female artist called Susie Emery. The algorithm that she's using was trained on data sets that were all labeled painstakingly by humans. So that was kind of where I got to my article, that there's this hidden ghost in the shell. There's a whole world of ghost workers who are actually driving not just the creatives themselves who are producing all the artwork, but actually the laborers who are labeling stuff and allowing these algorithms to leverage that information. So I think have always been really interested in it, but it feels like it's come to a bit of a head this year with lots of different arenas and lots of different creative spaces. And so I was kind of interested to explore it. And I think I was also, it made me think about what creativity is. When we start questioning, can a computer really be creative? Okay, well, in the same way, what is artificial intelligence? What's intelligence? What's creativity? I really like Joey Cofone, who has this incredible book, The Laws of Creativity. And his definition is humankind's, so he even begins, humankind's unique ability to combine unrelated and abstract ideas. And finding patterns, finding and making unusual connections. So I do think that AI can find patterns and relate unrelated information in really curious and interesting ways. But I do not think that they're truly creative. And that is. But
I think you could. I mean, it feels like you could make up loads of caveats to this stuff, right? So arbitrary kind of extensions of that. So you're only creative if you can make abstract connections and patterns and you like it. Okay? You know what I mean? It's like because the systems aren't, they're not sitting there making works of art, are they? They are prompted to do an action because we, as human beings, have prompted it to do an action.
Yeah.
And we're deriving value, hopefully, or something from that output. The system itself is just sitting there waiting, not doing anything, not feeling anything, and not being creative. It's maybe producing creative works. But it doesn't want the creativity itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I 100% agree. I don't, I agree with Boris and in his, application for this award. I do not think that photography and AI generated imagery should be compared in the context of a competition like that.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting when you think about copyright. Again, this year, the US Copyright Office withdrew copyright protection from a comic book when they found out that the imagery had been generated with Midjourney. and saying that, it was not the product of human authorship. And I kind of agree with that sentiment, that creative work produced by generative AI is not truly created by humans, and it's not truly created by machines. It's like an extension. And I think that's where I settled, is like, it's an extension, it's a tool, it's not a replacement. But it's an interesting question. Like, it comes to your point, the intention behind it. And again, I come back to my reason and what is intelligence, why, the kind of intention behind the creation of something is really critical to it. So yeah, I mean, I think the other thing I explored in this article, and that slightly prompted it, was I did a BA in model making. What a random thing, Harry. I just really liked films. I liked art, and I wanted to do art that had, could be used in films. So I went down that road, and we did lots of different models. We did kind of architecture, like beautiful, tiny little miniature fascination projects of tiny buildings. We did stuff out of clay and card. We made stuff in silicon and fiberglass and all this kind of stuff. And in my second year, I came to Bristol, and I did a placement working and making props for the Wallace and Gromit film, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit.
Yeah,
classic, nice. Aardman classic. And actually, interestingly, one of the first Aardman productions to use CGI in the production. And it was quite a pivotal moment for me, because I was in my sort of final year of this degree, and I remember speaking to a very senior prop maker and talking about computers, because I'm a bit of a nerd. I like computers. I always like playing around with them. I did that's where I started learning 3D animation, was on this degree. And I was chatting to this prop maker, and she was like, yeah, it's not just model making. Like, it's not just stop motion. Like, every area of model making is changing. Card and clay and all these traditional materials, we just kind of can't compete with what they're able to do, and actually the kind of costs and the speeds of it. And the reason I was interested this year is that I started seeing like various posts and things with CGI model makers basically saying, we're all going to be out of a job because of AI. Yep. It's going to destroy our industry, and like panic and fear. And I think it will, whilst we could argue that it's not quote unquote true creativity, it's going to change. It's going to change the ways of working, just maybe in line with the way it always has done, but it will change the ways that we do things. So there's more I could say about this.
Yeah. I feel like you're alluding to there's going to be this kind of artisanal, like 3D art house, like prop makers, like, oh, we make the finest 3D generated by hand in the computer, no AI, textured only by hand.
Yeah, I mean, you do see like actors talking about, how kind of challenging it is to work in a full blue screen environment, and how, I don't know, we were watching some of the extra bonus features from the latest Indiana Jones, which I loved. I loved it.
Yeah, haven't seen it.
Dial of Destiny.
Yeah,
classic, like classic indie, really good. I also would love to be Phoebe Waller-Bridge, so that was a joy. And yeah, in that, he's, in some of the other stuff, they're talking about the fact that they made New York, and they kind of created this whole this whole carnival, and everything was going on, and he was really riding a horse and all that kind of stuff. And actually, just the actors find it tricky to work when everything is being done by a computer. So that kind of getting back to something tangible and that we can touch, I think is something that we're balancing between always. And obviously not every studio can afford the budget of doing that, and they still used a whole load of CGI on Indiana Jones. Of course they did, but this idea that actually it's not always the right tool in every situation, I guess.
Yeah.
But in terms of like the future and jobs, and how this disruption will go, I don't know if you saw, but there was someone from Morgan Stanley recently forecasting like changes in the labour market, and saying that, like, is it Brian Nowak saying that, like, you know, AI will affect 44% of the labour force in the next few years, you know. Right. And obviously that's like the labour force in general. Like when you think about creative roles, how is that going to change them? The more I've thought about this and actually read about it, and I just think it's such an interesting question, I do think that whilst it will change jobs, that there will always be need for a human at the center of it. That, you know, even this guy who submitted this photograph, Eldrickson, he was really good at using those tools. Like he was very good at writing prompts, but he was also very aware of art history and how photographs should be composed. There was a huge amount of skill and that was writing the prompt. Obviously, then we've talked about all the other humans that are a part of that. And, you know, they've got this, they're still not resolved, isn't it? They've got the actor strike at the moment where they're trying to figure out, you know, in Hollywood, how they can protect their voice and body being used without their consent. It's like a really interesting ethical moment for questioning how we reuse creative material. And so, yeah, in terms of creative roles, writers, photographers, designers, illustrators, model makers, etc., I do think there'll be a lot of disruption, but I don't think it will replace the human creative. And also, actually, I think a big part of that does come down to this like copyright question, you know, like we don't consider something that has been created by generative AI to be copyrightable. Perhaps it's unclear completely on Midjourney's platform, but in certain arenas, perhaps. So in order for there to be, you know, for a studio to like own something, it needs to be done in a different way. But that doesn't mean that the AI can't augment and it can't help. You know, so I think that there will always be need of creatives. The way creatives work, I think, will shift. I guess my like position on this is that it's a positive thing, because I think an eternal optimist. I don't think I can change that. I think I will always be optimistic, even in the face of things going wrong. I'm always like, but it's going to be fine. And so I do think it's positive, everything that's shifting around us, and it's good that we're kind of challenging and questioning it all. But you know, it's ultimately it's a tool. And and I did this course. I did the course. You know, the Do lectures courses. I did their like, it's something like use ChatGPT like a pro. They're like talking about being a pro a lot, which I find quite fun, with David Hyatt. And this was all about writing and how to use, you know, tools like how to use ChatGPT and tools to improve your writing. And his big takeaway was, use this as a tool to become a better writer. Don't use it to just write stuff for you. Use it to research, brainstorm, challenge your assumptions, coach you, you know, provide alternatives, compare your work to some of the work that you aspire to be like, you know, the artists that you aspire to be, the writers that you aspire to be, and like just disrupt the way you do things. And I guess that's sort of maybe how I view the way that AI will impact the world in a creative sense, will be through augmenting the human, supporting the human to do those things that all artistic pursuits require researching and challenging and rethinking and comparing and coaching, and all of that stuff is relevant for all of them. And I do think that, you know, as these kind of general AI tools get more powerful and more specialist AI tools come, you know, these kind of maybe like less interesting, uncreative, repetitive tasks, we can dial them down and hand them somewhere where maybe a machine is better at, and that we can, and you know, we can actually lift This is my optimistic.
Yeah. I like the idea of that, like that
Yeah.
you kind of have a choice to say, well, all these things this is redundant for me to do. Like this is ridiculous that I'm doing this when this system can just do this much faster and better, and it's not something that we enjoy doing in the first place. And that feels like a total win-win, right?
Yeah.
But then there will be places where it's like, well, you know what? Actually, I do really want to write this thing today, and I've got a good idea for it, and I don't want to sit here with a couple of prompts or whatever it is and just blast away at it for 10 minutes, for like half an hour trying to find the right thing, when actually I kind of know what the right thing is, right? So I'm just going to write it down, or I'm just going to start painting, or I'm going to talk to someone and we're going to work this thing out, and we're going to make and direct a film about it, whatever. I feel like that is a nice place to get to, but it's kind of like, how do you keep hold of that autonomy, of that like decision making within like essentially the commercialness of that situation, and having it so that like all those decisions aren't already commercially decided previously because it's cheap. It's just cheaper, right? We've already fired all of those people anyway, so the choice isn't there anymore. You know what I mean? So it's like holding on to the possibility space around some of that work, almost not completely getting hollowed out by, it is easier, faster, and is maybe doesn't get consumed as much, but it's still making us money, so it's the right thing to do. Like,
Yeah, and I think a concern in this whole space is that we're going to just devolve to the mean, and
yeah, exactly.
We'll reduce creativity because we'll all be drawing from the same pot with the same resource, producing images, music, writing that's all like the same. It's all generic and all bland. And I think that there's like a duty to keep topping up that well of that we're all drawing from now, this melting pot of creative work. And I think that's the Midjourney imagery is not copyrightable, but it can be used and goes back in to the system to generate and be used by others to create other things. So continuing to encourage, I guess, people to take photographs and make models and write their own stories, but then also not be afraid. I think this is classic Mind Over Tech is like, how can you get the best out of it whilst retaining humanity, while retaining your intention and your values and your purpose? How can we use it to be more creative? How can we use it to lift up the work that we already do? And that's what interests me. So yeah, I watch with interest, but I'm using all of these tools. I think they're powerful and they're very cool. But lots of ethical questions are being raised, and I think it's a very interesting time.
Do you think, Harriet? Hi.
Hi, Ben.
Do you have an idea for what those new opportunities or new jobs or new creative practices actually could look like? If you're throwing something at the wall and going, okay, well, 10 years time, guys, we're going to have this crazy thing because we can now do this new thing, and we extrapolate that out a little bit and we get to X, Y, Z, have you got any ideas or aspirations around that almost?
Such a good question. It makes me think of my children because, there's some brilliant stat out there, which I'm going to butcher, that's like, I don't know, I'll make something up. 90% of the jobs that our children will have haven't been invented yet. And that's a stupid thing to say, but like, what is it that my children are going to end up doing? And there was obviously a time in history when that was super clear, and there was a very limited palette of options. And now, what are they going to end up doing? I hope it's something creative. I hope that we use technology in the way that maybe the science fiction writers hoped when there was a more optimistic science fiction.
When was that?
Yeah, I think it's before we landed on the moon. I listening to Help me. Who wrote Game of Thrones? J.R.R. Martin.
Yeah.
Him saying that, everyone was so thrilled that we landed on the moon. What they didn't expect is that we would stop. That's where we would stop.
Yeah.
That's where, for him, it sort of started becoming much more dystopian, the vibe of science fiction. But anyway, there were also, because we're working a lot and we've partnered with 4-Day Week Global, which is very interesting. I think I mentioned this already. It's a very interesting mission around helping people change the working week. There were predictions, again, I can't quite remember the stats, but there were predictions that by now we would be working, like 10-hour weeks or something, because technology would be lifting and doing everything. And it's kind of gone the other way. It's pervaded into all of our personal life instead. What I hope, my dream would be that the roles that are available for my kids are creative and that they are pushing boundaries of what we can do now. And of course, there will always be the bottom line in situation. There will always be companies wanting to create more for less and create more value for less. But fundamentally, humans exist to create. We have such an urge for it. We have such an urge to make new things and to kind of help people. So maybe that's what I would wish for. I would wish for there to be opportunities for people to be creative and to share their creative ideas and output with the world, and opportunities for us to be able to help people in a richer way, whether that's through advances in medicine. There's a lot going on in health tech. It's really interesting. I think an opportunity for us to find a better, I don't want to use the word balance, but for us to find a better way of working that allows us to, stay connected with each other, and feel like we know what we're trying to achieve in life, and using technology. I'm not really answering your question because you're like, what are the jobs that we
Come on.
Ben. I guess we'll always want stories. People love stories. So how can we use these tools to tell better stories, to tell stories to help people, in those kind of areas. But exactly what, I don't know. Will it be space travel? Will it be learning more about the bottom of the ocean? Because there's a whole load of unknowns about what's underneath the sea. I don't know, Ben. What do you think?
God damn it. That's not the point of this podcast. It's not about me, Harry. It's about you and who I'm interviewing. Oh my God. No, you can interview me another time and I'll tell you what I think. How's that? I don't know. I think there's a lot of interesting things that we could be doing, and this is obviously sidestepping the question completely. And I hope that we pick the ones which are going to be most beneficial for us, as the ethicist in me, and not the ones which are going to be detrimental. And that's a nice segue, because my next question is, what scares you about our technologically mediated future?
What scares me? I mean, I guess the trend that I've just said, where we're working harder and have higher expectations from what we can achieve in a working day than ever. And we're all working in silos and remotely and not having enough human contact and not being able to self-regulate for our well-being and being just less human. I guess that would be my fear. As I said, I'm an optimist, so I like to think that won't happen. Having said that, there are certain new jobs that aren't in the future. They exist right now, working in places which sort out packages and those kind of centres where I think that people aren't necessarily treated in a way that we would hope, and don't live lives that feel full of meaning and purpose and aren't well connected. I think it's happening now in some areas. So maybe there's a fear I have that there will be an increase in that, and that by serving our desire for convenience, for example, to get a parcel delivered in an hour's time or by the next day, which sometimes is extremely, extremely important, but most of the time is entirely unnecessary. But by pushing towards that service of human convenience, that we actually create another less convenient world for someone else, shall we say. I think I worry about the hidden cost of some of the advances of our brilliance, because I think that, you know, you look at some tool like ChatGPT and it's breathtaking. And I'm still scratching the surface of what it can do for me. It's quite easy to forget what it's founded on and the human effort that it's founded on and continues to be. You know, I think there's a fear around people not going into artistic careers because they can't, you know, have a kind of make a living, and they can't. So yes, those are some of my fears. Would be around a dissolving of humanity in the face of technology. But...
Yeah, and I mean, it strikes me, coming back to that promise that we had, you know, from the 50s, 60s of the future, where it's going to be a space race and we're going to have a 2-day week or whatever, a 3, you know, whatever it is. I feel like there should be more emphasis on the technology to enable us to get to this, you know, creative place where we are fulfilled in our work and our families and our sustenance and all these things that are make us, you know, physically human, very, very obvious things. And then if you're going like up the pyramid of needs and things like that, then, you know, we have an opportunity to do exciting things, but they don't necessarily, like you say, they don't necessarily mean a package delivered the next day, or, you know, people who are monitoring the AIs being harrowed daily by the things that they see there. And, you know, that isn't necessarily the case that we need to do those things. So it's weighing those things up. It sounds very utilitarian, but, like, you know, we have a choice there about how that operates. And I would probably take a pay cut to have a 3-day week. You know what I mean? You know, there's certain things where it's like, no, actually, guys, come on. Like, I don't need a Porsche. Don't give it to me. I don't need it. Like, and all the Porsche owners, they don't need them either. So don't worry about it. Sorry if you do have a Porsche. I'm not. Yeah.
Very Porsche people.
Very Porsche.
No, you're not the only one. You know, since the pandemic, I think a lot of people have reevaluated their values. I think that applications for becoming a teacher, for teacher training, like skyrocketed because people thought, what am I doing? Like, I actually really want to teach people or spend more time with my family and have a life that is actually giving me opportunity to spend it with the people I love.
Yeah.
And so I think this idea of actually people pursuing time for themselves with their work and taking that over pay, it's a very common sentiment. Whether everyone can achieve that is, you know, not always a privilege that's available, but like I think a lot of people are very much questioning what life is for and how they spend it. And it's a very interesting question as we started to work remotely, how we kind of work in the future. What will the future workplaces look like? And, you know, many companies are fully pushing for people to come back and return to their commute. Many people are resisting that. There's arguments both sides of you know, what works best for individuals, but I do think it's been a good time of reckoning about how we want to spend our time. And I'm not sure where it will all end up, but it's I'm optimistic.
Good. I like it. I like an optimist. I think it's very easy to get dragged down by these things as well. So I think that's positive.
So yeah, I think the other area is around what we can do, and I really do think that what I'm interested in and what Mind Over Tech has been founded on is the idea of taking action.
Yeah.
We all know lots of things that we could do, but it's just hard to start doing them. So we kind of focus on taking action. And when we're working with a company, there's an individual responsibility for being more aware of how we're using technology and questioning maybe the digital habit culture of an organization. There's also a responsibility for leadership to look at what's currently going on, maybe challenging some of the ways of working, and probably what we see most of all, being more explicit and clear about what they expect, because employees will kind of assume a certain behavior is expected. Oh, I should reply to this Slack message as soon as it comes in because I'm probably expected to. It's never been said. I've had CEOs in sessions before say, we would prefer that you took half a day and came back with the right answer that was considered than, a knee-jerk reaction in the moment that distracted you from whatever you were doing. Just having that said out loud, I think was extremely important for that business. So having a sort of like digital agreement of way of working, I think can be really useful. So this idea of there being responsibility in two directions, I think the same is true of the world as a wider thing. You've got, I think there's a huge responsibility for tech companies to be thinking about the way that they design things and the way they design their tools and how they fund that, and questioning the attention economy and how we're making decisions on tools and how they work. I think there's a responsibility from policymakers to set ground rules and expectations for everyone in that space. And then I'm starting to see more and more people who kind of curate a community making more decisions upon how technology is used in those environments. Schools who are making decisions that children are not to bring their own devices to school, they're not allowed to use them at certain times of the day. There's a town in Ireland where everyone agreed that they wouldn't get phones until a certain age because peer pressure is so strong that actually if everyone is in the same situation, then it becomes much easier. So there's a lot that we can do at different levels. And also in this idea of like where technology will take us and the fears that we've just shared around where it doesn't, we have power as consumers. We have power in how we use tools, what we pay for, what we sign up for, and to think, let's take a minute and think, am I comfortable? Do I really understand how this works? And maybe question some of the impact of these things as they come.
Well, lovely. I think we'll leave it there for now. Another good segue, if people want to find out about how these things work, then do message us, ethical.design, because we do run workshops and talks about AI, but obviously very interested in AI ethics and how AI can be leveraged ethically and how you do that in a process in your company. But also, if you are interested in Mind Over Tech, how do we find out about you, Harriet, and what you're doing at Mind Over Tech and how people can get hold of you?
Oh, we'd love to hear from anyone. You can find out about Mind Over Tech at mindovertech.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. My surname is very odd, but I think Mind Over Tech will be the best route to find me. But
I think your name will be in the description of this episode, so
perfect.
Hopefully
easy does it.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, it would just be really interesting to continue talking about this, because I think that's the most important thing, isn't it? Just to keep questioning, talking, discussing. So would welcome comments on all the different platforms and places that we could connect with people. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks for having me, Ben.
Thank you. And I'll hopefully speak to you very soon.
Yeah, take care. Thank you.
Bye. Hello and welcome to the end of the podcast. Thanks again to Harriet for coming to talk to us. Do check out Mind Over Tech. I've actually got a couple of talks and workshops planned for the New Year's. So if you'd like to get in contact with me personally, you can email hello@machine-ethics.net, or you can go to the website ethicalby.design. One of the things I really liked about our conversation was this idea of creative duty, or the values we have in creativity in general. What kind of responsibilities, what duties, what ethics lie in the area of creativity in of itself is quite interesting, and something that I haven't thought of in that way before. So maybe another one for another podcast, or maybe an article or something. Thanks again for listening, and if you would like to support us, you can go to patreon.com/machineethics. You can also check out more episodes, machine-ethics.net. And if you can, please recommend us to friends and write a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.